Chint was number one market share, has been number one market share the last 6 or 7 years in three-phase string. Then we expect the same this year. So hopefully soon we'll learn 7 of 8 years in a row. And I think the reason for that is not maybe going after the next shiny object.
The Clean Power Hour is brought to you by the Clean Power Consulting Group. Check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Give us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify to help others find this content. We are growing the energy transition one podcast at a time, one guest at a time. Today on the Clean Power Hour, Bryan Wagner. He is the president of CPS America. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Great to have me. Thank you.
Bryan, it's been great getting to know you over the years and see Chint Power Systems growing their footprint here in North America. You're a well-known brand in the Midwest with the advent of community solar being such a big phenomenon with your 125 kW product. But we're going to talk about your larger inverters, your 250 and 275 kW, 1500 volt inverters, which are now going after the utility scale. But give our listeners a little bit of background on yourself. How did you come to the energy industry and how did you come to Chint?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. It's great to be on today and to be talking with you again. I'm sorry we missed each other at the RE Plus show a couple of weeks ago, but that was quite a fun event and good to see some old friends. I mean, obviously we set a lot of records with attendance. So, the demand and obviously the size of the industry continuing to grow is so exciting. But yeah, I actually got into solar probably like a lot of folks around that time. It was 2008. It was one of those things, there was really no jobs. So I really kind of more on a part-time basis, learning about the industry, jumping on, at that time, small commercial and residential roofs. Yeah, it was something that, I knew I just wanted to be a part of. I'm based in New Jersey so there's something back at that time called SRECs, energy credits, that were just starting and people didn't really know what they are. Obviously the returns were very fast. And I just knew, the industry was going to grow. I think around that time, there was probably less than 10,000 people in the industry. And I think now we're approaching 300,000. So it's a great time to get in. Obviously, it's grown quite a bit since then. And there's so many more large companies. Yesterday, I was at an investment conference. There's so many big investment companies coming in now. And it's just really exciting. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. And I didn't really get fully into my career benefit in solar, benefits and getting into like, an actual company until maybe 2009, 2010. Again, there was very few jobs at that time. So probably finally at Advanced Energy in 2011 is when kind of found my home or my niche in the industry in the inverter side. I actually started off in the O&M business. A gentleman named Joe Brotherton fortunately hired me, became a great mentor, taught me a lot about the O&M business. And then I pivoted at Advanced Energy to work under another mentor, Kevin Purdy, in the inverter business. And he taught me the inverter business. So that's where I still am today.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned RE Plus. If you're not familiar with RE Plus, they host the largest solar and storage conference here in North America. And there were 27 to 29,000 people in Anaheim this past September. They also have regional events, so just Google RE Plus events and you'll see they have them in the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, the Midwest, all over the place. And, New Jersey is one of the more mature markets, so I don't think it's an accident that you're based in New Jersey. And those early day SRECs in New Jersey were very generous. SRECs are a way to jumpstart markets. We have an SREC market here in Illinois. We are the most robust solar market in the Midwest because of the SREC market that we have, right? It makes for a competitive power purchase agreement. It incentivizes developers to develop community solar projects and to bring solar to low and middle income consumers, so many good things. And it's a win-win because we're cleaning the grid, we're shutting down coal and natural gas power plants and replacing them with distributed generation and utility scale solar, wind, and battery storage across the country and across the globe. Solar is now the fastest growing new source of power on the North American grid. And you wouldn't know it, right? Unless you're in the industry, but it's a growing footprint. But when you go to those mature markets like New Jersey and New York, Massachusetts, you see solar everywhere. And same in Colorado, Arizona, California. Here in the Midwest, we're playing catch up, but it's starting to take shape, and you're starting to notice it. So it's just great to be part of this very fast growing industry, which is really good for our future as a species. So let's dive into Chint Power Systems. You know, you are pretty much a household name in the solar industry, of course. Every solar professional knows about Chint. Well, first of all, I guess, why is that? How has Chint been so successful? And then what do you want to highlight in terms of the roadmap and the products that are just now coming out onto the market?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I would say, Chint really got its start globally probably in the mid 2000s, 2005 or so. It studied a lot of the different markets, emerging markets, and the US being one of them. So we are a global company. I work here in CPS America, and I would say when I was at Advanced Energy, we actually back then, Advanced Energy made an acquisition of a brand called Rafusol, which was a three-phase string technology from Germany. They were developing their own product, but they felt they can get to market a little bit faster with three-phase string. And they were, Advanced Energy had two different central inverter brands, PV powered as well as Solaron. Back then was number one market share, probably 6 or 7 years in utility scale, Advanced Energy. So we were really successful converting a lot of our, say, rooftop projects to string because of the new code in 2014 that was coming in, where you had to at that time, you had to mount the inverters on the roof within 10 foot of the array. So that's really what had string take off in the US. And obviously it was in, Europe for probably 5-10 years earlier. So there was many benefits, right? The lightweight, you're no longer pouring a pad. I mean, there was many benefits that we all know today from string versus central on smaller projects, right? Back then, a 100, 200 kilowatt project was very popular for even central. And then that all started converting to string. It took a while for string to take off, say more than a megawatt project. And obviously Chint was at the forefront of that. So I left Advanced Energy. And as I was leaving, this name Chint had come on the scene pretty fast. They actually were studying the US market and what technology they could bring to the market for quite some time. Actually, Casey Miller and Ed Hecox, who also are mentors of mine, really helped commercialize Chint, get the business off the ground, probably around that 2013, 2014 timeframe. And I think it obviously benefits any business to focus on one thing. And the one thing they focused on was three-phase string. And that's still where we live today. That's still our main focus today.
For our listeners, let's paint a picture of why string inverters are an advantage in many circumstances. And I'll lay out my understanding, which is, medium to advanced. But let's say you have a 1 megawatt C&I project, and you could do a 1 megawatt central inverter, okay, and then you could do 10 100 kW inverters, and today you would only consider doing 10 100 kW inverters, and you're talking about a physical box that is much smaller and lighter, so that two workers can carry that box around on the site. If it needs to be replaced, you can easily do that without a crane, for example. And then there's line losses. DC line losses are a significant consideration, right? If you only have one inverter, then all of the power is running through the array for a bigger, with greater distances, right, than getting to the inverter before it's converted to AC. And those losses mean fewer kWh from your solar array. And kWh is really the bottom dollar in solar, right? You're trying to squeeze as much kWh out of a particular footprint, out of available roof space or ground space. And then there's O&M considerations, right? When inverters need to be upgraded or replaced, then you have a much easier time with the string inverters doing that. And then you have less downtime, right? Because if a central inverter is down, then the whole power plant is down, and you can have significant losses, And sometimes there are supply chain issues. Here in Champaign-Urbana, we have a 5 megawatt project at the University of Illinois. It's Solar Farm 1, and it has central inverters. And one of the inverters was down for several months, and they were waiting on a part. And so that was just a major loss for the university and for the owner of that asset. But have I painted an accurate picture, and what are some of the nuances, Bryan, that differentiate string inverters from central inverters?
You absolutely did. Yeah, that was clear. Back at Advanced Energy Days, we had a 30 kilowatt inverter that was 3,000 pounds. It was definitely a big clunky machine. And, I want to say our 30 kilowatt inverter nowadays is probably approaching 50 pounds. So it's quite a difference. If you look at our 250 kilowatt, it's about 250 pounds. We're launching actually next year. We'll have a 350 kilowatt, which is about the same weight, about 250 pounds. And of course, our 50, 60, 100, 125 class of inverters is right around 150 pounds. So it's, total, like the power head and the wire box are separable. So they're two different boxes, but, it's much easier to service, like you're saying, Tim, of course. And so really it's about, I think, thinking ahead in your plant when you're designing 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out, what happens when things go wrong, when inverters break, or there's, nuisance issues or challenges, how quickly can you service the plant? Yeah, string has definitely been, very beneficial for that. If you look at a 1 megawatt central back in the day, it was probably 8,000 pounds. And in total, you could probably have a 1 megawatt array now for obviously, 100 pounds a box. So it's multiple steps throughout the array or the life cycle of the array that can save you just from the weight alone. But yeah, the ship and replace model too. Like you said, you had a project in Illinois with a 5 megawatt with, I'd say, one challenging inverter. Of course, there's been many brands along the way here that have not survived, even though they've had very healthy companies. In fact, AE was one of them, still a very big public company today, probably over $1 billion company. But they just pivoted from solar, from the inverter business. It really comes down to the service cost, and that percentage of revenue is really where I've always seen the market going. Is it's more about our kind of company. How can they maintain their business, right, and keep a healthy, growing business that makes a profit or turns a profit? With central inverter, it's very hard, very challenging, because almost every unit that you deploy eventually catches up to your operations and has an impact on your OpEx, right? Your service cost of the business.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clean Power Hour or viewing it on YouTube. We do have a great YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go to cleanpower.group and hit that YouTube icon and subscribe to our channel. Of course, you can find all of our content on your favorite audio platform as well. So please give us a rating and a review. Back to the show. Yeah. So the string inverters are kind of going through this arms race as well now. They started smaller, 30, 60, then 100, then 125, 150, now 250, 275. We see a lot of 125 kW inverters here in Illinois because we have a 2 megawatt AC solar market. Now that's a 5 megawatt solar market. The rules have changed, right? And so it's a combination of the landscape changing from a jurisdictional perspective and legislation, and then there's also the technology. A 125 is great for 2 megawatts because you have 16 inverters. It just fits nicely. But let's talk about 275s. You are winning some utility scale work with the 275. And I guess I'm curious, when you talk to EPCs and developers about their work and your products, what are the advantages of a 275 versus a central competitor, whether that's, I don't know, a 5 or 10 megawatt inverter? I don't know what, I know little about central inverters, relatively speaking. So paint us a picture there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what's interesting, that same 2 megawatt example, our 250's active power controlled, so or active power rating adjustable, so it could be 250 or 275. So actually you can cut your inverter count for that same plant now in half. So if you think about, each unit that you're purchasing has a better price per watt, but you're also eliminating half the units. So it's a significant savings on the CapEx and even on the operations of the plant, right? There's only 8 devices now. I think the main benefit of string in that example is you still have 250 kilowatt blocks that, when you're down, when you lose one inverter, very seldom, if ever, have I seen, right now, Chint we have about 10,000 solar plants. We have a little over 6 gigawatts of three-phase string out in the field, only three-phase string. We've done a handful of maybe 20 energy storage projects, but everything else we've done has been three-phase string. So we have a good sample size, and very, very rarely do you see more than one unit down at a time, if ever, for me personally. So I think in that example, you're only losing 250. The same rule applies to your 5 megawatt block, right? You'd likely use the larger building block for a larger plant size. And we're also offering, we just shipped 104 megawatt skid. Actually, we were doing 22 skids. When we say skids, that's MV station. So the medium voltage transformer, some low voltage equipment, aux power, and then the inverter shipped separate. It was almost 350 275 inverters for a plant, again, 104 megawatts, but you're building those as blocks. I think it's 4.125 megawatt blocks. That's what's great about string is it's also you can, in development, obviously your plant size changes. There's so many things that can change on the developer's end, and string gives the developer that flexibility. So I think, you were mentioning the life cycle of our inverter line or just the inverter technology over time. We actually started with a 14 and 20, then went 23, 28, 36, 50, 60, and then into the 100, 125, and now 250, 275. And like I said, next year you'll have the 350. So all those classes, I want to say 14s and 20s was 100 kilowatt, maybe up to a megawatt at most. Then 23, 28 got you up to maybe a megawatt was typical, 2 megawatts at most. The 36 is really where we saw kind of what we would say small utility or, large commercial, maybe 3 megawatts, that's what we used to call. And then the 50, 60, really we burst on the scene with that product. That's still, I'd say, our flagship product today for what we're known for. We've shipped over 50,000 units of the 50, 60 kilowatt, done all kinds of big box retailer locations, all the famous brands. And, that 50, 60, we also did like a 12 megawatt ground mount, right? But nowadays, like the 100, 125, easily 5, 10 megawatt plants, up to 20 megawatt plants. We've done a couple larger, maybe we did a 90 megawatt. We've done some larger plants, but it's rare. Probably north of 20 megawatts is rare. But the 250, 275 now with much larger size, it's an 800 volt output. It's really meant for utility. And I would say 20 megawatts and up is where we've seen a ton of demand on that product, especially at RE Plus. We probably learned of a couple gigawatts of string projects that will go string. Hopefully they go with Chint and hopefully they go with us. But that's kind of the evolution that we've seen. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I love about the clean energy industry is there is constant evolution. And, it was a big deal in 2017 that the 125 kW inverters were breaking onto the scene. And now it's the 250s and 275s. And there is this, medium scale utility market. Of course, there's a robust utility market, which is 100 megawatt plus projects, 100 megawatt to gigawatt scale. We have a 1.3 gigawatt solar farm being built in Indiana now, and many 100 to 600 megawatt projects in all the Midwestern states. Whether that's Indiana or Illinois or Wisconsin or Iowa, and but if you're an EPC or a developer, I guess, Bryan, and there is a cadre of tried and true brands, and I'll just mention a few of the better known ones. Those are SMA and Fronius for CNI, and then there's some other brands that are well known in the larger utility space. Power Electronics, SunGrow, So there's this very robust competition for our attention, so to speak, as developers and EPCs. What is it that sets Chint apart, and why are your customers migrating or staying with Chint?
Good question. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I think to say bigger, or more experience, probably the easy route to go. I would say Chint was number one market share, has been number one market share the last 6 or 7 years in three-phase string. Then we expect the same this year. So hopefully soon we'll learn 7 of 8 years in a row. And I think the reason for that is not maybe going after the next shiny object market. I think the energy storage market is a perfect example. Obviously, it's a very challenging market. It's very challenging technology. There's very big challenges on supply chain, as everybody knows. And I think we've stayed very focused on what we do. We didn't really go after residential. We didn't go after energy storage. We didn't even really go after utility. I think we've let the markets come to us, and we've let the technology grow up. Really, the IGBT, the ability to go larger building blocks didn't exist a few years ago like it does today. The technology didn't exist. So I think you're never trying to push your technology too far, right? I mean, we won a 90 megawatt with a 125, but it didn't maybe necessarily belong. More had to probably do with safe harbor than anything. It didn't necessarily maybe belong on those sites. And I think we've done a really good job of that, where we play in our market and it's our niche. And then that niche, fortunately, has grown for us. If you're building a 50 megawatt plant today, I would say 1 out of every 2 developers out there is starting to consider string on that size plant. Whereas 3 years ago, string didn't even make its way to the conversation. So I think our main focus has been to build our business and our team to be able to handle complexity that comes with running an inverter business. Inverter business is not really that profitable of a business, right? So and I think it's pretty heavy in manufacturing. So it's definitely some barriers to entry. But I think it comes down to how we can operate. And we've done a really good job with the 10,000 plants that we manage, being able to keep our field service team lean, but manage the projects and deliver. We say, delivering our customers the best uptime. If you think about it, really, that's the business we feel we're in, kind of like your cell phone provider or your internet service provider. We're your inverter service provider. You're really buying us for our service. Now, we do make, maybe you'd call it the inverter these days, where it's so small, lightweight, the iPhone, if you will. So we make the hardware, but we also are very well known for, purchasing the hardware so you can get into our service network and, you can work with our team. So we have a very big team out of Texas. James Oswald's our service director down there, has been with us probably almost 8 years, does a tremendous job. We have leaders like Robert Priswaz, who's one of our field service engineers in Massachusetts. David, who's a former NextEra wind field engineer. We have, and also we have a very strong apps engineering team, right? And I've worked with, I don't know if you know the likes of, say, John Foster or Ephraim Tagliamonte. These are kind of, I'd say, more apps engineering legends in the business. At CPS, we have some of our own as well, Stephen Ballinger, John Drummond. And, we do a lot of that upfront work to ensure that, it's not just a string sizing tool, ensure that we can lay out the inverters in a way that, you're thinking about service of the plant. And I think we train our customers really well. They try us, they stay with us, and then, it improves over time because things change over time.
Service is such an important component. You need a product that is affordable, but is also very reliable. And then when you need parts and service, you can get them in a timely manner, right? And, these are very sophisticated pieces of electronics or conglomerates of electronics. 100 kW inverter is like a suitcase. But So you're monitoring that. I guess we should talk a little bit about, what is your out of the box monitoring system? How does it plug and play with other monitoring systems like Also Energy? And then what is the experience that an EPC can expect, or a O&M provider, when they're interfacing with CPS America?
Yeah, so I mean, we have some technology that effectively allows us to pass through the inverter data to the Also Energy monitoring portal, as well as to our own service team, so we can do the remote diagnostic. I think that's definitely given us an advantage. I think it's more to still do with the humans and the team than it is the technology. The technology is kind of similar across the board, in my opinion. I think it's more how, not just hiring the experts, but how the team works together. I think Chint has been a very strong culture, place to work internally. We've created, long-standing careers for many. One of our guys has been with us almost 15 years in service. I think from that, then that takes care of the customer, right? It's like, there's a lot of companies that I'd say nickel and dime over the service cost and rolling a truck and this and that. We don't do that. We kind of realize that it's, taking care of, it's part of our business, right? It's like, hey, if you have a nuisance at an inverter, say a fault on inverter 4, that's our problem. That's not the developer or the owner's problem. It's certainly, we share a lot of times in that challenge, and there's been challenges along the way. I mean, many come up, but I think it's the way we've approached keeping the plants online. The reason we won that 105 megawatt plant, we had lunch with the owners, and finally the last decisions were getting made, and they said, we want you guys to get us to as close to 100% uptime as possible. Maybe the number is 96, 97, 98%, whatever that number is. We just felt like we visited your facility in Texas. We just invested quite a bit into our new facility in Dallas, right outside Dallas in Richardson. So we have a lab that we actually can test 800 volt equipment. We can really do, we have our own knock center, so we monitor the plants from the knock. We have a couple things that we do unique there. And when they visited that, they were realizing, wow, Chint's kind of, they said, we even want to help you get into this utility scale. And they have gigawatts that we're working on with them right now over, say, the next 3 to 5 years. And I think you'll see 3 to 5 years from now, very similar to, say, Europe or Asia. A lot of parts of Asia are this way today. 80-90% of plants are designed with string, right? Utility scale is designed with string. There's just such benefits to it, and I think you'll see that in the next 3 to 5 years for the U.S. as well.
You mentioned that you are working on a 350. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah. And do you foresee going even larger, like 500 kW?
Right now, the 1500 volt class of inverters we first brought in, I think one of the things Chint's thought about a lot, and goes back to probably someone like Casey from a product side, and certainly our R&D team. We always want to, we don't always need to be first to the market with a product, but we always want to be maybe second or third or even close to first. But we want to be thinking about flexibility and how can we think about the wire box or options that we give our customers or designers to work with us. So the 125 is a perfect example of that, because we came out with both a centralized string inverter version and a distributed. So your traditional string, where you have the DC combiner attached to the power head, it is separable wire box, which is Chint's been very well known for years for that. But we also offer that centralized version where you can run one long home run back to the inverter and kind of build the plant like a central plant. Virtual central is kind of what got coined. That also took off, and we probably had 50% of our customers go virtual central and 50% go distributed. Right now we're offering distributed for the larger size, but we're working on other things, and I would say more to come on that. Not yet, but more to come on that. And I think Chint will continue to offer the flexibility as we get into 350. The 350, we have some customers already designing several 100 megawatt projects with the 350. So I know that one will really, do well as well.
One of the other hot topics in string inverters is rapid shutdown. If there is any kind of a problem with a solar array, you want it to turn off and not aggravate the circumstances, so to speak. What is your strategy, and are you working with other manufacturers of power electronics closely on that particular topic?
We are, yeah. I mean, we've probably done, I would say, in the neighborhood of 250 to 300 projects now with rapid shutdown. I mean, we might be north of that, maybe approaching 500 nowadays. I'm not exactly sure, but we've done quite a bit. And I think this first started becoming reality maybe 2017, 2018, as the code was changing. The technology started to become available. Obviously, SolarEdge has done a tremendous job and dominated that market for a long time and still does really well in that market. We think optimization is there's pros and cons. I think obviously we always think in terms of less part count and easy to service and less headaches down the road is been our approach. And I think with rapid shutdown, there are some interesting things going on with the technology. Today we are working with 3 brands: NEP, APS, and Tygo. Each of them has different advantages, and I think we've had a lot of success in that arena. C&I business, SolarEdge, obviously very strong residential background. Years past has been on every other home. I think for CPS we've had close to 50% market share. So almost every other commercial project for many, many years. So I think that's our goal, is we want to continue to do really well in that C&I space and come up with new technology. The 50-60 kilowatt, we've had different designs over the years above 50-60, but it's a really good building block. It's a really good size. And I think what's more important than anything to our customers is it's a very reliable inverter. It's probably the best inverter I've been around. For a rooftop application, that's the most important, right? If you have technical challenges on an inverter, when that happens on the ground, it's just different than a roof. So I think, as much as rapid shutdown is important, I think a reliable machine, inverter machine is probably more important.
Cool. Well, I want to encourage our listeners to check out all of our content at cleanpowerhour.com. Please give us a rating and a review on Apple or Spotify. That helps others find this content. We are speeding the energy transition here at the Clean Power Hour, and we need your support. I want to thank Bryan Wagner for coming on the show. He is the president of Chint Power Systems America. Bryan, how can our listeners find you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And thanks for having me on the show. So my email is brian.wagner@chintpower.com. So that's Bryan with a Y. Yeah, that's the best way. Certainly I'm also on LinkedIn, but I think our team can always get a hold of me. So we have 4 offices, one in New Jersey where I am, our headquarters in Dallas, and then 2 in California. So we have a lot of folks that can help support.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And with that, I'm Tim Montague. Let's grow solar and storage. Have a great day, everyone.